Welcome to the Innovative Hotelier podcast brought to you by Hotels Magazine. I'm your host, Robin Trimingham. As regular listeners will be aware, on this podcast, we don't just rehash today's news. Whenever possible, we take the conversation to the next level by discussing where the hotel and hospitality industry is heading with some of the world's leading business and academic experts. My guest today, Karthik Namasivayam, is no exception. Serving as the director of the School of Hospitality Business at the Eli Broad College of Management at Michigan State University, he specializes in researching leadership and human resource issues in the hospitality field. And today we're going to chat about what he calls the coming of the fourth industrial revolution and its transformative impact on the hospitality industry. Join me now for my conversation with Karthik. FOH is a global food service and hospitality company that manufactures smart commercial-grade solutions. Headquartered in Miami, the company designs and manufactures all their restaurant and hotel products. They have showrooms and distribution centers located throughout the globe, and their products are always in stock and ready to ship from any of their distribution centers worldwide. Welcome, Karthik.
Thank you for having me here, Robin.
Well, I love talking to futurists, so I think we're going to have an absolutely fascinating conversation. To start us off here, though, I read in an article that you published last year where you used the term the fourth industrial revolution. And I'm a little bit of a history buff, so that got me interested right away. Can you briefly explain to our listeners what you mean by this term and why you're using it now?
So Mr. Klaus Schwab, who is the chair of the World Economic Forum, published a book in 2016 with the title The Fourth Industrial Revolution. He traced the different revolutions that have taken place earlier. For example, moving from foraging to agrarian, moving from the industrial revolution because of the steam engine, and then the third phase of that progression was really miniaturization and transistors and chips and all of those kinds of things. So at each stage, there was a revolution in how industry worked and kind of dislocated a lot of the existing industries. But what Klaus Schwab is talking about now is that there is a lot more systemic change happening because of all the different technologies that are kind of converging in some sense. If you look at nanotechnology, if you look at IoT, AI, all of these are coming together. And so it's becoming a system-wide change, which really implies that if one part of our economy or our industry changes, other parts have to change equally well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. If you take science, medicine, and technology, and you talk about how those things are converging and how rapidly they're changing and advancing, well, then you can see right away what we're in for. But we're trying to talk about the hotel industry specifically here. Are you suggesting that where brands once differentiated themselves primarily based on furnishings or amenities, that we're in the midst of a transformation where they're changing based on level of service or human interaction?
Yes, I think at a very high level of generalization, we can discern luxury hotels with a very high level of human interaction, and the rest with moderate to maybe marginal human interaction. So we have this whole kind of spectrum of hotels with different service levels. And that also applies in part to the interior design of the hotel themselves. The luxury end are very well designed. They have designer inputs, and they kind of shape their product in a much more coherent way than maybe hotels at the lower end are probably not doing as well. And they're much more cookie cutter replicas of each other. So there's not that differentiation that happens. But increasingly, though, because of advances in technology and its encroaching application, the, the hotels that traditionally relied on human services, brands will need to, again, intentionally redesign their entire hospitality product. So this means that businesses have to place a bet on one direction or the other. Are they going to be technology oriented? Are they going to be interpersonal oriented? So where the brands were differentiated by their design, interior design, today that is the choice of colors, quality of furnishing, music, the bouquets, aromas, whatever. Today, they will be differentiated by design, technology, and the level of human touch. So all these three things have to be intentionally designed in order to differentiate products.
So I guess then we're talking about the building blocks of these things in different combinations. So I read that you've identified 4 potential brand categories that for now anyway, you're calling augmented luxury, traditional luxury, tech, and economy. Now, most of the people listening around the world in the hotel industry will not be familiar with these terms at all. So briefly, can you explain the differences between the 4 of them?
Sure. There are 3 main elements that must be aligned and balanced. The first is the design of the spaces themselves, or servicescapes, as we call them, in which a service product, or if you prefer, the experience is delivered, technology and human interaction. So these are the 3 main elements that have to be balanced and aligned. Academics love to work in 2x2 matrices. It's easier to conceptualize. And so as an academic, I'm no exception. So I kind of conceptualized how we can take the complete spectrum of hotel types and put them into some kind of a simplified model, if you will. So the model that I'm presenting is a simplified model, and it comes from 2 axes. So on the vertical axis, I plotted the extent of human interaction at the front end. So I'm really looking only at the customer-facing side of the hospitality product and really looking at the level of interaction that they have. It can be high or low levels of interaction. I'm not looking at intermediate, just high or low. And on the horizontal axis, I plotted the extent to which hotel technology is visible to a customer. So there can be visible technologies and invisible technologies. So what do I mean by visible technologies? When a guest checks in, you can see the check-in kiosk potentially, or you can see the POS systems and things like that. So those are all visible technologies that the guest is potentially interacting with, or knowing about those technologies and how they support the operation and checking in and all of those kinds of things. Invisible technologies, on the other hand, are all those technologies that work in support of the hotel operation. Back of the house operations, accounting, finance, POS systems, all of those systems that the customer cannot see, but are very common in multiple different parts of the organization. So when we look at what I'm interested in these 2, in the 2x2 matrix, is really the visible technology. To the extent that a customer can see the technology and interact with it is the visible technology. So when you cross these over in a 2x2 matrix, you have 4 quadrants. And so when you look at high technology visibility and a high interpersonal interaction, which is on the right top corner quadrant,
Okay.
you will have a augmented luxury, because the technology is visible as well as there's a high level of service. And so I call it augmented. So augmentation here really refers to service being supported by technology directly. And on the left top corner is high service, but lower levels of technology visible to the consumer. And that would kind of parallel the current 4-star hotels, 5-star hotels, and luxury properties, because you hardly see a lot of technology in the front end where the guest is interacting with it. And so that's where I place those. The tech companies are those that have a very high level of technology and are leaning very much into the technology space and have lower levels of interpersonal service. So the most common example that comes to my mind is that of the airline check-in counter compared to about 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the levels of service that have changed, we have fewer people supporting the check-in. You do have a floater at the kiosks, but you essentially check yourself in, you get your boarding passes and proceed to the aircraft. And you have one person or two people kind of floating around supporting those folks who are finding it difficult to get through. So that would be a tech oriented kind of an organization. So if you were to look at a hotel which has that, it's not to say that all the people will vanish, but that they will have different numbers and there will be a lot more technology. The economy is those properties that are neither investing in technology nor are they investing in interpersonal service. And so you have that kind of a space where I think it'll be very difficult to compete in future. The names of assigned to each are just
Right.
random. They can be named anything else.
Okay, now that I've heard you describe all this, I have questions. I'm going to take a swing at this here. So what's interesting to me is when you talk about high tech and high touch at the same time, and that being different from high tech, but not very visible. And that's what you say we have at the moment. Now, I'm in a fortunate position. I get to talk to all kinds of people working on all kinds of different AI projects and development. And I remember talking to one of my guests about the fact that they're developing technology around heat sensors. And I'm oversimplifying, but the concept is that the human will walk into the room and the system will automatically know, oh, it's Robin or it's Karthik, and oh, he prefers the room cool or she prefers the room a little warmer or whatever. And you don't see a thing, but magically it kind of happens. And I'm wondering how you would classify that, because that might be augmented luxury, or that might be more of a standard feature. How do you see this kind of shuffling out?
So I might call it augmented luxury simply because I think there might be a biometric reader or a cell phone reader or one of those devices which the customer has to have in order for that system in that room to recognize the person entering that room. And therefore, there is that kind of little bit of visible technology in that luxury space in creating that experience. And so I would perhaps put it in the box of augmented luxury. So I'm talking about the experience being augmented by technology and stuff like that.
Yeah, and we're just speculating, of course,
Yeah.
because we're living in an interesting time where everything is being developed as we speak.
Absolutely.
I have another question for you. You were talking about the fact that you were really just looking at the two ends of the spectrum, the high touch and the low touch, or the high visibility or the low visibility. But an awful lot happens in that kind of gray, fuzzy middle ground. What do you think of the potential for either a VC think tank or some kind of startup engine accelerator program actually running AI programs on all of this and figuring out, where are the sweet spots, if you will?
You're absolutely right, Robin. I think that's the next step, really. I think the hotel industry, by and large, have been laggards in adopting technology. And I think a part of that is because of the business models that are prevalent within hospitality, where you have a franchise organization, you have different ownership structures. And so the capital to be invested in particular advances are distributed. And so it's not focused. And also the cost of upgrades become part of the calculation. And so and that's probably the reason why we see a lot of ad hoc adoption of technologies as they are developed, rather than a intentional design hospitality operation that starts from ground up to be digital. So, for example, I think McKinsey and Deloitte and all these leading consulting firms have constantly spoken about how an organization has to be digitally designed in order to take advantage of all the technologies. I think hospitality is kind of anchored in two issues. One is obviously the business model that I spoke about. The other is potentially the ethos of hospitality, what hospitality stands for and what it has always stood for. I think so. Those two factors might play a role in how soon hospitality adopts technologies and takes it on. So, to your point about VCs investing, I think this will be a great time to invest in a end-to-end system and to develop a hospitality product that's entirely driven by tech from ground up.
That's an excellent point. And I think you're the first person I've actually heard to make that point. Because it also really brings to light the fact that you could go down 2 or 3 different paths. You could absolutely go down, let's design something from the ground up that is all tech. But I also think you could, if you started from scratch with a clean piece of paper, which would be really hard for hoteliers to stomach, that you could also come up with, I'm going to call it some kind of brand new hybrid scenario in which you have the best of both worlds coexisting to make a better experience for, oh yes, the human.
Yes,
I'm interested that as far back as I think it was 2017, if I've got this right, you published a paper where you were talking about the advent of tech-spitality. And you were researching the emotional implications associated with removing front desk staff from the check-in process. Talk to me a little more about your research in this area, because 2017, that would sort of put you really at the front of a lot of what we're just seeing coming online now.
Yeah, sure. So most of my research from my dissertation on has been to understand the customer interaction better. The point at which a service person and a customer meet is the most critical point of any service organization. And I think, we have examples from the CEO of Scandinavian, Jan Carlson, who termed those as the moments of truth for an organization. So I think that's particularly important for an service organization to manage. And I wanted to understand that from the point of view of customer, what really satisfies the person. And previous researchers had identified a number of factors, both discrete elements in the service product, as well as things like tangibility, reliability, empathy, and a whole bunch of other factors that they had identified as being critical to the customer evaluation of quality or satisfaction with the product. My query was really, why does reliability impact a customer's satisfaction level? Why does tangibility or intangibility affect? Why does courtesy affect? And so on and so forth. So I kind of identified something that I thought was important. It's about a perceptions of control over the building of the service product. So as consumers, I think when we walk into a store or when we walk into a restaurant or a hotel, we want a certain service. And we have a preconceived notion of what that service is going to look like. I would like to have a room of this kind. I'd like it to be clean. I'd like it to be lit like this. I'd like it to be quiet. I'd like it to oversee the sea or whatever. So all of those things we put together and build what we might call a service product. So if you disassemble all of the components that one puts into that service product, you can find that there will be functional elements. I want a nice bed, but I also want a nice ambiance. I want a person who is giving me the key to be pleasant. I don't want an unpleasant exchange there. So we kind of build both of those pieces into our expectations of a service product. And therefore, when we start to disassemble or deconstruct the service product, we can find that there are a number of functional elements that are very, very important to that service. And then overlaid on it are all what I call the bells and whistles of our service. So you can track back the service product to early caravanserais or inns of the olden days. And we will find that the main product being sold there is a bed, not even a comfortable bed. So we have really, the product itself has not changed a lot what we sell as an industry. We sell a room, but then all of the overlay has changed quite a bit. So the emotional pieces are all overlaid beyond what it started off as. So we can't separate out the emotional pieces. I want to feel good. I want to feel happy. I want to feel satisfied. All of these are slightly emotional content of that service experience, as we call it, the experience now. And so my argument is that when you look at what happened during the pandemic, the separation between the emotional and the functional was very, very clear. We could see that people went into stores, went into restaurants, went into hotels with no expectations of that interpersonal experience or service, if you will, but were entirely satisfied with the functional aspects of that service product. And so the question is, if that is possible during a pandemic, why is it not possible with technology or with other issues that we can? And actually, one of the articles published, I don't remember the date now, but it was in the Lodging magazine, I think, where they had interviewed senior citizens. And at that time, technology was not really common, but they had interviewed senior citizens about their preference for technology or non-technology. And the statement senior citizens made was, I would prefer not to wait in a long check-in line if there were technology. So ultimately, I think it speaks to the fact that nobody wants to wait in line, go through the hassle of getting that service, if there were a simpler, easier way to receive a room key.
Established in 2002, FOH is a woman-owned global food service and hospitality company that manufactures smart, savvy, commercial-grade products, including plateware, drinkware, flatware, hotel amenities, and more. Driven by innovation, FOH is dedicated to delivering that wow experience that restaurants and hotels crave, all while maintaining a competitive price. All products are fully customizable, and many are also created using sustainable, eco-friendly materials such as straws and plates made from biodegradable paper and wood and PBA-free drinkware. FOH has two established brands: Front of the House, focused on tabletop and buffet solutions, and Room 360, which offers hotel products. Check out their collections today at fohworldwide.com. This is fascinating to me because what you're really talking about here is people buying into things that meet their key expectations. So I guess my question then becomes, how do you propose that we go about being clearer about all of these key expectations? Because yours and mine, they might not be the same.
Yeah, and I think part of the way hospitality organizations are reacting to this is how they deploy technology. So they are more cautious in deploying technology at the luxury end of the market, whereas at the more economy and budget scales, we see technology being rolled out in the front quite quickly in the customer interface sections as well. So I think the industry, as it has always done, has segmented the market, is segmenting the market, and kind of creating appropriate experiences, if you will, depending on what it is. So one of the ways I have been thinking about how the industry might develop in the future is to look at, again, I'm speaking at a very macro level. I'm not talking about the nuances within each one of those two, but the industry is probably going to break out into two broad groups of organizations. The one group of organizations will be the highly tech-oriented, tech-mediated, tech-driven kind of hospitality organization. And the consumers who go to those organizations are entirely comfortable with apps, keys on their phones, speaking to the front desk through a text message or apps, and so on and so forth. And then you have the luxury market. And I mean luxury only because of the fact that these are groups of people who will still want to have that interpersonal contact and an interpersonal service element. And it's a separate discussion about why they want that interpersonal uh,
Yeah.
experience. It can be a sociological explanation, can be from class, can be Marxist theory, a whole bunch of different things can explain that. But nevertheless, there are a group of people who are willing to pay extra money in order to get that extra service. And because human labor is going to get more and more expensive as technology starts to creep in, that is going to push that entire market into the luxury sector, if you will. It will automatically price those products into the luxury market. And so overall, you're going to have a group of lodging properties or hospitality properties that are going to be heavily touch oriented in the front end and less touch oriented in the front end on the other side. So these two groups will start to split out, I think, going forward.
So I've talked to lots of AI enthusiasts, and they're developing apps and applications and all of this stuff. And they all say the same thing to me. They all say, oh, well, it's going to free humans up to do either the more important tasks, or sometimes they say it's, the tasks that the machines can't do or shouldn't do. Look in the crystal ball for me here. Like, where is all of this heading? I mean, McDonald's, I understand, has rolled out a new version of McDonald's restaurant in which it's entirely tech, no people whatsoever, except, I guess, somebody to repair the equipment once in a while. What's going to happen in the hospitality industry? Where are the people who work going to work?
I think this is just such an important question in my mind, not only because of my, I've spent about 40 years in this industry, and looking at the evolution over the last few years has been kind of mind-boggling for me, how it's kind of transformed and how it is. And so if we were to extrapolate from all of these trends going forward, but also from the work of labor economists and other people who have been studying how labor has formed and what kinds of skill sets are required, et cetera. There are a number of reports out there which speak about nearly 42% of all workers needing to reskill and to learn some new skill sets in the next 3 to 4 years. That was in 2019. And then there are some reports from McKinsey and others who say that about 75% of jobs are going to be in the frontline contact jobs are going to be replaced. So there's just this whole bunch of trying to figure out what's going to happen. But one of the things that I did look at was, we did a little research project funded by the Statler Foundation recently to understand what's happening to hospitality jobs and things like that. More often than not, the respondents agreed that that technology is going to play a big role in the work environment. There are increasing numbers. They also said that jobs will increase by 0 to 5% in the next 5 years. And these were all top executives speaking about how the transformation is going to take place. But the thing that I suspect is that jobs are going to shift. They're going to be new jobs. And as many labor economists have spoken about, every time new technology comes in, a new set of jobs will start to be developed as well. So I suspect that's the same thing in hospitality. As new technologies are introduced, old jobs will go away and new jobs will take their place. So net, the numbers of jobs might remain the same, but that they might be totally different kinds of jobs. And so as an educator, for me, what I'm interested in understanding is what are those new jobs that are potentially going to come up as a result of technology being introduced. And just as an example, in conversations with top execs, I know this has been a move for some time, but has become really predominant now, is that many hotel organizations are now introducing the role of a commercial manager. The role of a commercial manager includes the roles of a revenue manager, a marketing manager, and a sales manager. And this was possible because much of the day-to-day tactical aspects of revenue management, of sales management, and marketing management have been automated. So this is a very quick example of a new job evolving because of the fact that technology has taken over some aspects of it.
You know, that's a fascinating example to me. You may not be aware, I actually have worked in the hotel industry. And yes, I was in the big bad sales department.
Yeah.
So I can relate to this one because, one of the big holdups when you have a great piece of business on the table, particularly if you're doing large scale group convention kind of business, is that, okay, first of all, you have to find the space. Then you have to find out whether or not you can have the space at the price the client is willing to pay, or conversely, what price is the hotel willing to let the space go for. And there could be all these big delays and time gaps while you tried to sort all of this out. But if you have one person who has big picture training and the tools right now in front of them on their own desk, I mean, how much easier is that?
Right. That's right. So I think those are the kinds of changes that are kind of evolving around the industry at this point. There's obviously a lot of change that's happening in the back of the house, in the accounting, in the finance, in all of those things. Robotic process automation is a big thing, so you can automate a lot of that. Chat AI has helped a whole bunch of telephone answering and querying and FAQs. So it has definitely reduced the numbers of people required to manage the same hotel. I'm just curious for my own self and for the school that I'm leading, really curious about how that's going to transform what our students have to learn and how they are prepared for the future of the industry. And that's where I'm so engaged with how technology is going to affect our industry, how it's going to evolve our industry, and what do we need to do to get ready for it.
So one of the comments that you made early in our conversation is that those hotels, those brands that choose not to embrace all this technology, who don't go down this path, are going to find it harder to compete. Do you feel that's going to be equally true, whether we're talking about a national brand or whether we're talking about a boutique or independent operator?
I think it is to a large extent. And I'll give you an example from earlier days. The roadside motels started to adopt HBO, but they did not all adopt it at the same time. But all of the motels were forced to adopt HBO because the neighbor had HBO. So that's the front end piece of it, the marketing piece of it, the consumer facing part of it. But if you were to think of the cost economics of technology supporting operations, you can easily compare two properties, one with technology support, the other without technology support, and the disadvantage that a hotel that does not have technology will face in terms of costs and management and all of those kinds of issues. So if technology becomes common, if it becomes cost effective, if it becomes less expensive, as the adoption grows, technology tends to become less expensive. Then you'll see that there will be a shakeout in the market of those properties that don't adopt technology at the same rate as hotels that do.
I think somewhere in your equation, then you must be factoring in the time, the rate of adoption, because I'm all about finding the gray areas in discussions. So I think it's interesting because if we're not adopting all that quickly or at the same rate from one country to the next, then an operator might continue to go on for quite some time under the illusion that all is well, and then suddenly discover that he's been left out while his back was turned.
Yeah, right, Robin. I think that's fascinating, actually, because the rate of adoption and the compulsion to adopt are things that are market driven as well. So at what pace do consumers in India, for example, adopt technology compared to consumers in the United States? As an example, there are more robots in China and in the Far East than there are in the US, for example, in terms of service robots in the front end and things like that. So the Asian population appears to adopt or respond to robots serving them far more easily than perhaps Western consumers. So those differences will obviously affect the rate at which certain technologies are adopted. But I think in terms of the cost element, it may be that we'll find, you know, uh, business models that kind of emphasize software as a service model, where a hotel can subscribe on a lease basis or just rent space from the cloud and operate their property. So that'll be a lesser cost than actually installing technology in their unit. And those models might become much more common as the industry and technology also becomes much more sophisticated.
That's actually an excellent point. So if our listeners are taking us seriously, we've said a lot of scary things in this conversation. Let's talk about something a little more positive. To be sure, HR policies, hiring practices, employee benefits, they're all in a state of flux throughout the industry right now. How do you foresee employee roles being transformed by all of this? And can you give me any other examples of where you actually see opportunities for employees who are properly educated, properly trained, however we're going to say that?
Yeah, I think there's a big opportunity here for hotel organizations themselves to look at their employee base and to say, okay, we're going to grow this way and we're going to include technology in these spaces, et cetera, and help prepare their own employee workforce, the employee base, to respond to these new kinds of work roles that are available. These employees are valuable because they understand the company culture. They've been there with them for some years. And so to just provide them the skill sets required to work with technology would be really advantageous both to the operator as well as to the employee themselves. So there's ample opportunity to reskill, retrain, and redeploy our employees into spaces that will support the future strategy of the hospitality organization, no doubt about it.
So we have a minute or two left here. What's your key message or your key piece of advice for everybody who hears this podcast?
I think the important takeaway here is to really continue to think about how technology is going to shape our industry and to start preparing for it already. If that's one key takeaway. The second takeaway is, can we redesign business models right now intentionally to incorporate technology and to make it the best possible model going forward? That will help us as educators. It will help us understand exactly what business models are going to be prevalent and common, and help prepare our students for these kinds of roles. And that's very important for us, I think.